Well, everyone, it's time for us to talk about the Samsung Galaxy A50 and see how this phone holds up in the 2022 year. Now, this phone has been out for about 3 years now, and it's very interesting because this is a phone that when it came out, it was pretty much one of the more popular phones at that time for a budget tier device. A lot of people were talking about this phone at that time, but even now, Samsung is really kind of, niched down their Samsung Galaxy A series of phones so well that they are easily one of the best budget tier phones you can go ahead and buy. Nowadays, these things are selling for around that $100 price tag. Definitely not super expensive. So if you want a budget phone, this is an option, but I would kind of wait out to purchasing this phone just because it is kind of getting into that outdated section because of its software versions and other things like that. But we'll go ahead and talk about that throughout this whole entire video. If you want to pick up some other phones I would recommend this year though, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, looking on the body and outside of this specific phone, this front of this device had a 6.4-inch Super AMOLED display, and this was a 1080p panel. Now, it was actually a pretty decent panel. Of course, it's not like amazing or crazy or anything. And at this year, we did have the Galaxy S10 that came out, which was a beautiful panel. This one wasn't that bad. I actually did kind of like this panel a little bit just because of the cheap budget tier price that Samsung was giving at this moment. But like I mentioned, this wasn't really like an amazing crazy panel, and that's kind of one of the disadvantages of getting a phone like this, is that the panel doesn't hold up really well, but it does have a little bit of, bezel-less design on it, a little bit of bezel on the bottom, that Infinity U display I think they called it at that time, but it's still not that big of a deal in my opinion. Now, you did have a USB Type-C port on this thing, which was really cool. You had a headphone jack, and you had a microSD card slot on this phone too. So that in and of itself is a really cool experience. Having that type of I/O on a phone, even if it's a budget tier phone, kind of makes me think, if they can put it in a budget phone, why can't they still put it in a top tier flagship? We're spending more money on those phones, but I guess it is what it is. Now, on the back, we did have a plastic back on this device. It had a plastic back and a plastic frame as well. Nowadays, it is a little bit interesting because there are some flagship phones that Samsung made that did have plastic backs as well. Their S22 series does not have these plastic backs anymore, but back in the day, these ones all had plastic backs, and then the S21s had plastic backs, so it's very strange. But I guess when you feel it in the hand, does it feel like a cheap phone? I will say, yeah, you can definitely tell it doesn't feel like the most premium thing in the world, and that may be one of the bigger disadvantages of getting a phone like this. It doesn't feel like the flagship. It doesn't feel like, the budget. It doesn't even feel like a really good budget feeling phone. It feels like a cheap budget phone for the most part, but that's not really a bad thing. If you're spending, $90, $150 or whatever on this thing, I guess you kind of know what you're getting and you don't expect it to be a flagship. But when you think of phones like the Galaxy S8 that looked so well and performed so well even in 2022, it is kind of weird to think about a budget phone like this and to see how weird it feels in some cases, but it's definitely not that big of a deal in my opinion. Now, we do have the camera setup on the back of this thing too. It was somewhat of a triple camera setup. We had a 25 megapixel wide angle lens, an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor, then a 5 megapixel depth lens. We also had a 25 megapixel wide angle lens on the front. Now, don't let the megapixel count kind of fool you. This is definitely not a phone that's going to be competing with the Galaxy S10, but it's definitely not even a phone that's competing with the Galaxy S9 in my opinion, or the S9 Plus. And this is a phone camera that is, I would say, very decent for it being a budget tier phone in 2019. It's almost like what you expect. But if you just look at this phone and you look at the camera sensor and or you look at the megapixel count, that's where things start taking a little bit of a different story for the most part. This is a phone, in my opinion, that its camera just really isn't going to rock that well in 2022. Now, the first thing I want to say is the photos, you can go ahead and get decent photos from this thing probably, but the problem is that with a phone like this, the UI and with its performance, it's actually fairly low. It does actually feel kind of cheap when you go ahead and kind of zoom in and zoom out. So that's kind of one of my errors with this type of, thing, in my opinion. It's like, it kind of zooms in and zooms out a little bit slower. It kind of is a choppy experience, mostly because of the performance. But if I had to say the photo quality, it's not that bad, and I'm sure most people can probably get a decent photo, out of this thing, but it's definitely not competing with the Galaxy S8 in my opinion, or Galaxy S9. It's not that great, but if you're in good lighting conditions and everything, maybe you can go and get a decent, camera photo from this thing, but it's not that great in my opinion. So in terms of the camera, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the software version, this is another interesting thing. This thing apparently ended off with One UI 3, which was technically the last version of Android that we just got. We're now on Android 12, and we've actually been getting the betas of Android 13 that I've been using as well on my Pixel 6, and I will definitely say this thing is already outdated. The fact that we're going to be getting Android 13 later on this year, I think in a One UI version, that is going to put this phone in a very, very interesting spot where it would make pretty much no sense to buy this phone anymore if you wanted to use a phone for many years to come. However, if you're already using this phone, if you already own it, then that's a little bit of a different, experience. I would probably tell you to keep this phone as long as you can, even if you're planning on keeping it for maybe the end of this year. That's not a bad idea, but if you're planning on, buying a phone to keep it for many years to come, do keep in mind this phone is kind of outdated in that standpoint, and that's kind of another problem with this phone in my opinion. So, in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the performance, this device does have the Exynos 9610 chipset inside of it, octa-core CPU, with 4GB of RAM on the base model, but they do go up to 6GB of RAM. Now, as I mentioned before, this is definitely not a phone I would recommend buying if you wanted to have the best performing phone, even in 2019 for a budget phone, but it's not that bad. I don't think this was like a bad performing phone, but the problem with a phone like this is that it's going to be pretty much a very choppy experience type of device, whichever way you look at it, and that's kind of a problem when you're going to use a phone for a long period of time. When you have a device like the Galaxy A50, this is a phone that was supposed to be a budget tier phone, but I do think Samsung since then has learned a lot, and they've really improved on the speed, and they really improved on the speed of a lot of their older devices. So because of that, it just doesn't make too much sense to go and buy a phone like this, because this was, I would still say, Samsung's testing phase. They were just trying to see if this phone was still a decent phone. They were just trying to see if they could go ahead and, what the market share of it was. And I will say the A51, A52, A53, those ones that Samsung's made, and the future of Samsung's lineup looks a lot better for their A series than this one. And I'll say if you need a phone and you're not doing anything super crazy with your device, then I would say probably this one isn't that bad of an experience you could probably get from it. But it's not until you go ahead and start actually utilizing this thing on an everyday basis, that's where you're going to start seeing slowdowns, especially if you're going to go ahead and compare it against any of the phones that came out, even like the Galaxy S10 from 2019 as well. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. In terms of the battery life, this thing had a 4,000 mAh battery inside of it, which is actually pretty crazy because that is a big size battery to have, especially on a budget phone as well. So that is another really cool thing Samsung does. They just go and just throws a bunch of different, little features like this, like a micro SD card slot and big size battery inside of their phones. And I definitely do like those things that Samsung kind of throws in every once in a while. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video and to answer the question, should you still buy the Galaxy A50 in 2022? I will probably tell you no. I don't think this thing is necessarily worth it as of right now, but I definitely do think that in 2022, there are many other phones that are still worth it, even from Samsung themselves that they've made, that it may make a little bit more sense to go ahead to even buy something like a Galaxy, A53 or A52. That may be something that's a little bit better, but I do think, the Galaxy A50 is still a really good phone that was legendary, but the newer phones that Samsung's made are so much better, and I'd probably recommend going down that direction in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.